G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it.
Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Cameron Schwab, who is CEO and founder of Design CEO, and he's based in Melbourne, Australia, and also lives outside of Melbourne a lot of the time in a lovely little country town called Dalesford. And today we're going to be discussing team culture and high performance and the development of leaders. So thanks for your time, Cam.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks very much for the opportunity of having a chat.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, this is the first time we've met, and I reached out to you, one, given my love of sport and AFL particularly, and you having a long history in that and now running your own business, and I love the correlation between the two. So, and here we are today. So maybe just tell our audience a bit about yourself and your experience sort of on this topic.
Yeah, well, I pretty much grew up in the game. I was person who, my father, Alan Schwab, was a very well-known football person. And so I grew up around the conversations, even at a very young age, about, I can remember my father having Tommy Hafey, the great Richmond coach, over at our place each Sunday morning, or we'd go to his place and they'd talk about the game. They'd replay the game to each other from the day before. There was no press play on a video player in those days. And I was a young fellow, and I worked out if you're really young, if you're really quiet when you're a young guy, you can pretty much get in anywhere. So I just stayed quiet and just would hear them talk. And often the conversation turned to concepts around leadership, although I probably didn't understand what I was hearing, but I understood the concept relatively early. And then I worked in the game myself, and initially just as a young person in a footy club, then in recruiting. So talent ID was sort of where I cut my teeth with Melbourne Football Club when Ron Barassi was coach. And so very fortunate to have some really strong leadership profiled people in my life early. And then I was appointed Richmond CEO at the age of 24. So the CEO thing came early for me. And then I got to do that role in another two clubs, so Richmond, Melbourne and Fremantle for the next 25 years, and had the highs and lows that associated very much with the game as it will inevitably create and put pressure on everyone, and obviously the CEO not immune from that. And for the last 7 or 8 years, I've pretty much drawn on all the learnings of that to try and create a system of leadership to support mostly CEOs and their leadership teams. And it's a system, but it's a system of leadership consciousness as well as capability, like as in finding your own leadership voice, as well as obviously a system of leadership in terms of how do you do it in an effective way. And it's been a good business, and I've really enjoyed the conversations that I've got to have, and realizing that the metaphor of sport does in fact transcend in ways that I hoped it would, particularly as it relates to performance and the behaviours to create that.
Yeah, no, certainly an interesting journey so far, right? And so what was the sort of catalyst to sort of get out of the sport environment and start your own business?
Well, I got the sack, so that's normally a catalyst. so that's I was sacked as CEO of Melbourne, and it was a challenging time. Obviously, it's and I was the funny thing is now I have a reflection on that I think because I was in say my late 40s, I think at the time, and maybe I've turned 50. It mightn't have turned 50 yet, I think. And I've done it for a long time. And I think there was probably part of me which needed to sort of sense what it would be like. Actually, when I finished, I sort of fiddled around with putting a business together, but then I actually ended up studying fine art for a few years. And I really enjoy art, and I've always done art in one way or another, mainly drawing, and end up at the Victorian College of the Arts. And what I worked out this is probably a bit of a thing on life I've worked out, but I didn't understand it at the time, is that the majority of important things that have happened in my life is when someone's seen something in me that I'd never quite seen in myself. And that was initially Ron Barassi saying that, have you thought about recruiting? And I went recruiting players, and he supported me in regard to that. And And then, even in, as a CEO, young CEO, I never thought of myself as being a CEO at that time. Someone saw something in me again. And then even when I was studying art, which was definitely of my own choice, was people would ask me, similar to yourself, would be interested in coaching or interested in speaking, and it really built from there that I found that myself really enjoying the making sense of the experiences that I'd had as a CEO. And I think sense making is one of the critical things that all leaders have to do, because we're often we're only really leading if you're facing into ambiguity. There's no reason we don't need leadership unless it's ambiguous, probably. That's one of the core elements of it. And so the business really emerged from there, and it's called Design CEO, because I like the idea of design, as in we get to, one of my favorite little ideas is design beats discipline. Like everyone, we were talking about getting on the bike earlier. You and I are both cyclists, and if you're not a well-organized person, you can't be a cyclist. In my experience, particularly in the climates that we're in, we're both in cold climates. So your stuff's ready the night before, and so you make the discipline of the act as easy as you can by designing a system to work well. And sport builds off that. Sport's not, many ways, people, for people who love their clubs and love their teams, they think of it as club versus club, team versus team. But when you're inside it, it's system versus system. It's our system versus someone else's system, and it's a very complex, organic, system, but it's still a system. And we're trying to get our system to beat your system, and hope that it holds up, for the 2 hours or so on a match day. And the further we go, the more your system gets tested as we come towards the finals. Now there's going to be a few systems which will get tested in ways that perhaps haven't been tested yet. So that idea of building a leadership system of operations. So it comes back to ideas around the mechanics, but what are the mechanics of a good system? But you also need to get the dynamics right. The dynamics as it relates to, the individual personalities and people who are involved in that organisation at that time. I think the mechanics you can evolve and put almost into any organisation, any high stakes, high performance environment, but you have to adjust your dynamics based on the personalities and the people who happen to be there at that time. And that's one of the key things that I look to teach.
No, fascinating. Certainly, you hear the AFL coaches talk about system regularly, right? So
yeah.
So I guess within that system of leadership, so sort of what's the sort of key components that you teach and coach in that regard?
Well, it comes back to an overarching goal, which I think all organisations have, is creating the conditions which enable this group of people to perform at their best. So what are the conditions that we need to create? And I then think, coming back to that, and that's, I think, more than ever, there's a balance between sort of the high performance element of those conditions, but there's also the well-being element of those conditions as well. I think our generation's seen a change from that point of view. I very much grew up with, just push performance as much as you can, and we'd often get screamed at, in regard to the pushing of that performance, and I experienced a fair bit of that, and I probably was one of those in lots of ways, because that's how I understood it to be. Whereas it was all about extracting performance, if you like. Whereas now I think it's much more about unlocking performance. How do we, create those conditions? And so if you just come back off that idea, we're trying to create the conditions. Well, almost everything I do then comes back to one question, which is just simply, what does the role expect of me? What does this role expect of me? And that's not a question you can answer in a one-hit scenario. That's got to be something you've got to ask of yourself all the time. So I actually say to people, 3 hours every 3 months just to answer that question. What does the role expect of me? And we break it down across 3 dimensions. The first one, what does it expect of you as a character? What sort of person? How are you going to show up? What mindset? Are you a learner? Are you a teacher or a teller? So it's that mindset around your character. But then we also move to the capability piece. What skills you need. What does a good outcome look like for you? What does track record look like for you? And we often start with that, where we might say that if you and I were having a conversation in 18 months' time or so, and you lean forward and say, look, yeah, it's gone pretty well. Yeah, this has gone pretty well. Well, we then look to describe what pretty well looks like, and and it's the thinking, feeling part of pretty well as well as the seeing, hearing. There's in your how are you feeling as well as what outcomes you're getting. Because I think we've got to be good at both. And then the last part, so it's character, capability. Then we look at connection, which is then, what are the most important relationships that you need to have. And even now, I work with people who are involved in the AFL in coaching, and I often start with that. Who are the 4 or 5 most important relationships you need to have in good shape, for you to be able to do the thing, so you can get the buy-in to enable you to, because often these things, particularly turnaround scenarios, can take time, and they're going to get tested, and you're going to get it wrong, and you're going to have to bounce back, and the scoreboard won't necessarily show the benefit of the work you've done for some period of time. So how are you going to hang in there in the meantime? And so that simple question, what does the role expect of me against 3 domains, character, capability, connection, is a practice of reflection, which I think sits at the heart of any form of performance. We can get so caught up in just the doing and the work coming towards us, the busyness, if you like. But if you're not carving out time, and you can't answer that question for yourself, well, the chances are you're not leading in a way which is building the dynamic, as I mentioned before, that this group needs from you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to look at it. I'm just thinking in the context of a small business owner, because typically, I guess they're challenged in their own mind, at least around time, and the ability to sort of take time out and reflect is so very important, as you and I know.
Yeah.
So I guess for a small business owner, is there any sort of tips that you can provide to help them get started, if you like, in that sort of reflection of them as a person, a character, capabilities, in connection?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I just talked to the easiest way to do any sort of practice or reflection, my experience, is to ask questions of yourself, and because there's a wonderful quote which I think goes something like along the lines of, if you're underthinking, read; if you're overthinking, write. So if you're underthinking, and this read might be now listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
And I think there's always an element of that. So that goes to the learning piece. So that's the openness of your mindset. So if you need an answer to something, there's no lack of places you can go now to find out the answer to that, or something which at least put you in the right direction. But once you've got that knowledge and understanding, well, the question you're always going to have to ask yourself is, what am I going to actually do with this now? How do I do it? So I just have the system I talked about, 3 hours every 3 months, is just a way of actually, and you've got to look at it afresh every time. Don't look at the last time you wrote it, because there's a tendency just to we'll do a marginal, it's the same as it was. Like, well, the chances are you've missed something. So you just ask it, because it's got to really reflect on what's going on for you in that moment. The second one is you can get a little bit more strategic about it. So I say to people, I'm going to give you 4 questions to ask yourself every month. And the first one is just the simple one. It comes from the sport mindset. What does winning look like? Okay, what does success look like? And often winning doesn't look like winning. If I'm in a club which is, so if I'm North Melbourne at the moment, or West Coast Eagles, or in the bottom part of the ladder, well, even though North had a good win on the weekend, but even though winning, you're looking at that is an outcome based. So you say, and winning looks like these behaviours. If I see consistency around these behaviours, we can be very confident we will start to get the outcomes that we're seeking. So the first question is, what does winning look like? The second question then is, based on that, what do we need to be good at? So based on an ambition that you now have, how do you match that ambition with capability? And the only two capability levers that we actually have are people and systems. We don't have any other levers than those two, but they're working together all the time. If you change your system, your people need to evolve and change with it. Sometimes it's a whole new group of people. If sometimes when you bring new people in, they want to change the systems a little bit, so it's working all the time together. So that matching of ambition and capability is one of the most critical things. And in my experience, it's where it lacks most, because we tend to go high on ambition, low on capability. Therefore, we overpromise, and overpromise kills trust. And we're all capable of that. And coming from elite sport is in the overpromising business. It just spends its whole time overpromising in lots of ways. And then the third question is, what am I going to do? And this is the tough question, because you now have to make some trade-offs. And we've got an idea of ambition, we've got an idea of what capability. Well, you're going to have to make some trade-offs here. What am I going to do? And the most important thing trade-off that we have to make is where we actually choose as a leader to put our time, or most importantly, where we're going to put our energy and effort here. Because otherwise we'll live our life out of our inbox. Otherwise we'll live our life with the stuff which comes towards us, rather than us actually being. Sometimes you have to be very resistant against that, because it mightn't really matter. There's a difference between what seems to matter and what truly matters. So one of the reasons we ask these questions is we're trying to define what truly matters here. Otherwise, our life just gets caught up in all these seems to matter things. So those trade-offs that you make there, if you're going to do more of something, you better do less of something. If you're going to add something, you better take something out. It's a simple concept. And then the fourth question is, how will we know? Which is that, again, comes back to that idea of measurement. So what does winning look like? What do we need to be good at? What are we going to do? And how will we know? And just by asking those four questions, and I'm only talking about an hour a month, and I find once you've locked away an hour, you almost look forward to it. And so you come off this podcast, if you're listening to it, well, the first thing you do is just put an hour in your diary, as soon as you possibly can for that, and then make it a repeater for the next month, in the next 12 months. You're just going to have an hour where it's in your diary at a time when, and people go, I haven't got time for all that. Well, you're actually, what you're doing is you're trading off the important stuff for the less important stuff. And, as much as that seems a really challenging thought, sport is all, like elite performance is mostly, the most important decisions are what we trade off. We're choosing to do this, we're choosing not to do, therefore we're choosing not to do that, because you can't do everything. And we employ a whole lot of really expert people who all think their own areas are the most important in their own way. If you're the dietitian, the psychologist, the biomechanist, the physiotherapist, but if you let them go on all of the players, well, they'll fill, 500 hours of the players' time a week. We'll have a whole lot of, but we don't. We have to really trade off what effort we're making as it relates to that individual player to allow them to be the best they possibly can be. And that means, saying no often to all of the conflicting elements that can really impact often in a negative way. If you've got caught up in the busy, the chances are you're not being the best you can be. I think that's really the answer.
Are one or more of these growth pillars standing in the way of you living the lifestyle you've signed up for? People, strategy, marketing, funding, or systems? We have a free ebook filled with actions and templates on each of these growth pillars. Download for free from our website, growasmallbusiness.com.
Yeah, and I think it's a great way of looking at it. And with that, what do you need to trade off? Because I think definitely small business owners tend to be more often not micromanagers and trying to do too much. So, where does their priority lie? And I think the four question you raise is a fantastic way of starting to look at where their priorities need to be. And like you say, just allocating time, and it's just, I suppose, the more you practice, the better you get at it, like anything, right?
You do, but they'll never be easy. Just so you know,
No.
it's like there's certain, getting on the bike, mate. There's certain hills are never going to get easy, and one of the reasons they're never easy is because as you get fitter, you push yourself harder. You ask more of yourself. It's and not want to keep drawing on the cycling metaphor, but the amount of times I go, I'm just going to go for an easy ride today. But once you're out there, you start pushing. Because there's a whole human nature element kicking in here, but leaders often have to be better than human nature, and that's one of the pieces of work I do with leaders is we go, what are your leadership or often your life principles? What are the 3 or 4 principles of your life? Because you need to learn to trust your principles, because you can't trust your feelings. Your feelings are going to betray you. There's no doubt about that. That sense of overwhelm. Well, we're going to go to that place often. It's our response once we go to that place, or it's not your first thought, it's your second thought. It's the one of the things we speak a lot about is that situation happens. Like something in life happens. It's not the situation happening which is the issue. It's your response to the situation happening which creates the outcome. So we have a little formula: the situation happens times response equals outcome. And if your response is one to get into a blame place or very negative or criticize or whatever it might be, well, that'll find friends really quickly, but it'll find no solution for you either. So even say a sport metaphor, which is a good one, is we say never blame the player. Never blame the player. Even if the player makes the most, kicks the ball out on the full from 15 meters out, we go, okay, what situation did we create to enable that to happen? Had they done the right training? Had they done the right work? Are they the right player? All of the things that you then reflect upon, and then you ask yourself, well, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again for that individual if we're going to continue to play them? So by blaming the player, we were the people who put the person out there. We were the people who delivered the ball to them. We created all of the things which, even though we might feel as we're sitting in the stands a million miles from that outcome, but that's the reality. That's what leadership is. It's all on you. It sits with you, but it's never about you. And so you get into the blame stuff, you're making it about you in your own way, because you're just saying, oh, I'm not taking any responsibility for this. And so that's that idea of feelings versus principles. So if your principle is never blame the player, when the minute you feel that, you go, hang on, no, there's no future in that. What responsibility do I now need to take as it relates to whatever that outcome was? And that's then a far more productive conversation than standing in the corners of change rooms with other people just blaming the coach or blaming the centre half forward or whatever it might be, the recruiter, whoever we can find to blame in that moment.
Yeah, it's a downward spiral, isn't it? And I think in a business context, I see too often that happen where employees might do a bad job or they leave, and it's all about the employee, but they've actually been set up to fail a lot of the time because they haven't been provided the right resources or expectations. There was a gap in whatever it is. So I love that. Never blame the player. I think that's a great principle for small businesses to follow and actually understand the why it's happened, right?
Yeah, and that's our responsibility as leaders. How did it get to that point? And sometimes there's context as well as content. As in the action itself, you analyze, but then you look at the context itself. Like if the player's been doing the same thing for the last 5 years, well, that's a different context than if the person would normally nail that shot every time and happens to have missed. So even in looking at the situation happening, you look at the context and the content. That's the thing which is specific to it. If there's a poor behavior inside your organization and it's a one-off, it's a very different thing to a repeated behavior. If it is a repeated behavior, well, the chances are maybe you perhaps could have intervened a little bit earlier than what you have. And so it is really, looking in first, but even the idea of blame is not an inward thing. It's not about blaming yourself. It's about taking responsibility.
Yeah.
Because self-blame is as dangerous as blaming the player, if you like. And I think we all fall for that a bit, because I think when I say it's all on you, but it's not about you, the ideas of blame could easily enter into your mind with that type of thinking, but it's not that. It's about taking responsibility, and that's often, again, what are the conditions I need to create to enable this group to perform at its best? Well, blame as a thing, for instance, will actually dilute any prospect of that very, very quickly.
Yeah, very good point. So, look, Cam, I could talk all day on this topic with you, but just to close out, what's one thing our listeners should do, in your opinion, after listening to this podcast tomorrow?
That little monthly ritual I'd really embed.
Like that.
Again, one of the things which is interesting, because, as I mentioned, coaching coaches at the moment, is often ask them what their leadership philosophy is. What's your philosophy on leadership? And quite quickly they go to how they want to play, how they want to move the ball, how they want to defend, how do we stop the opposition from scoring. Whereas I go, no, I want to know your personal philosophy on leadership, and because I want to know how you're going to respond when we lose 6 games in a row. How's that going to hold up for you? Because that will be, yes, there will be things you'll be doing with your game plan. There'll be things you're doing with all of that. But and so by doing that, you then get to evolve and really go deep into what are your philosophies on situations, and say, like we've just explained. For example, I've got a little principle which is a really simple one, which is inhale love, exhale joy. Inhale love, exhale joy. And that might sound very kumbaya and very from the sport bloke, but I just know my first response is rarely the best response, and because I grew up in a very competitive environment, and that all notions of competitiveness are sort of they're things that we like, but we understand there's another side to them. So this little idea of inhale love, exhale joy is whenever I'm faced with a situation where I know my first response isn't going to be the good, I literally have a little inhale, and it might be you're grumpy with the dog because the dog's playing up. It might be that your kids have just thrown a little curveball at you that you didn't really want. It might be that you've been cut off in traffic. It might be that you've just watched, your best player miss a goal, someone you're paying $1 million a year to miss a goal from 15 meters out. So all of those things, it's just a little inhale, love, exhale, joy, because we're really lucky in the world we live in and the circumstances we are that, we can have these sorts of conversations. We can get on bikes. We can watch great footballers play. We can have wonderful family. But I know all of these things can often have that the world doesn't always work out in a way which is positive. And I think even, we started off talking about the fact that I got the sack. I remember thinking then, oh, well, inhale love, exhale joy. This is my world's just opened up in a way that as much as I wished it wasn't happening, I know that I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I've had in the last 7, 8, 9 years had it not been for someone making a choice on my career that I wasn't prepared to make on myself. Yeah.
As you say, it's there's always positives out of all events. You just got to make the most of it. That's how you react, as you said.
Yeah. So inhale love, exhale joy, mate. Next time.
I like it. I'll keep that in the back of my mind.
Good stuff.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Get a lot out of it. Thanks, mate.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey.